Welcome to Deloitte's Debrief Tax webcast series in Asia Pacific. Our webcast today is from our Global Mobility, Talent and Reward series, and it's titled A New Era for Mobility, driven by need for business resilience and cost containment. My name is Kenneth Pei, and I'm a tax director based in Deloitte, China, Hong Kong office. I have the pleasure of hosting today's webcast. I have two speakers with me today, Hei Chung Choi and John Fiji. Hei is a tax senior manager based in Deloitte, Korea, Seoul office. John is a tax managing director based in Deloitte, US, San Jose office. John will be transferring to our Singapore office later this year. You may access our bios on the left side of the screen. Before I introduce the agenda for today's webcast, I would like to take a moment to highlight some of the features of our webcast console. First, all users are on listen-only mode. If you have any content-related questions, you can submit at any time in the Q&A box at the bottom right of the screen. We will do our best to respond to your questions during the presentation. Second, all PC users can maximize or minimize each box at your convenience during the webcast. You may also explore the icons at the bottom of the screen. If you want to download today's slides and related publications, please go to the Downloads and Links box. On the other hand, mobile device users can view the slides and answer the surveys on screen. Thirdly, if you require an attendance record for this event, you can download your CPE certificate by clicking the Request CPE icon at the bottom of the webcast console. Now, let me give you an overview of the topics we will discuss. We will start off with understanding the urgent workforce challenges that will arise as part of a corporate strategy, such as moving people to fill talent needs during a business restructuring, outsource of work to service delivery centers, or even new market entries. Global mobility plays an important role to facilitate these talent movements in a timely and cost-effective manner. John will be sharing some live experiences in what the global mobility considerations are during a corporate event and how they are managed. We then shift to discuss our observations on the changes to the global mobility manager's role. Over the years, global mobility managers' roles has shifted from covering traditional assignments to business travelers, international rotators, etc. With so many emerging technologies and increase of internet speed plus COVID as a catalyst, organizations are actively exploring even more agile talent models. Hei will share with us some of the practical considerations for implementing these new assignment models. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the session. If there are any questions that come across your mind, please do not hesitate to leave them in the Q&A box. Now, to start with, let's look at the business challenges that COVID-19 has brought to the global mobility teams. There is consistency in the focus on cost containment and the deployment of a suite of short-term tactical measures to ease cash flow pressure and workforce underutilization, ranging from contract term variations to availing of government initiatives and easements to the extent that this aligns with the business's tax and broader principles. Asia has generally been responding better than the rest of the world. Many countries are moving to the recovery or even the thrive stage. During this time, close collaboration between HR, global mobility, and employment tax, and in conjunction with business and security stakeholders will continue to be essential to develop and implement a longer-term approach for staff requirements. Global mobility will continue to play a key role in supporting business needs, revisiting compensation cost structure, refreshing mobility policies, and agile talent models. Since we only have 1 hour today, we will focus on a few selected topics that are more relevant to our audience today as we navigate through the recovery and thrive stage. And that brings us to the first polling question of the day. The question is, what are the major business activities that your organization is considering or undertaking to achieve business resilience during COVID-19? And your options are: 1, consolidating business functions regionally or globally. 2, further outsource of work to service delivery centers. 3, reorganization and restructuring of businesses. 4, merger and acquisition. 5, new market entry. And 6, none of the above. You may select multiple answers that apply. And while we're waiting for the results to come in, hey, can I ask you, what kind of business activities that your clients are facing as they continue to recover from COVID?
Yes, Kenneth. Actually, before I share about the case, I'd like to share an interesting survey about COVID. According to a survey by International Labour Organization, 2.7 billion people worldwide and about 80% of the workforce over the world are affected by the COVID-19. So many companies are looking for a variety of ways to achieve business resilience during this pandemic. And I think one of the industries hit directly by the COVID is the airline industry. There is an airline company in Korea which was supposed to be merged with another airline, but the M&A collapsed due to the COVID. So then the company chose to reorganize and restructure the business as a way to keep the company. That means, unfortunately, more than 50% of all employees were either forced to apply for early retirement or laid off. And another case I just learned through the news yesterday, that Korean airline will acquire Asiana Airline, which are the 2 biggest carriers in Korea. By doing so, it would create the world's 10th biggest airline and boost their competitiveness in the global market. This can be seen as an example of the business activities that devastating aviation industry due to COVID try to achieve the stability of its business.
Thanks, Hey. Let's look at the polling results. So 42% of our audience says that their focus will be on reorganization and restructuring of business. 38% says that they are looking at consolidating business functions either regionally or globally. So it appears that our audience are mainly focusing on these 2 areas, which makes sense to me. And I also echo Hayes' point that this question can be quite industry specific. While most industries are actively identifying cost containment opportunities, industries such as, for example, home appliances, lifestyle products have actually picked up the momentum as people tend to stay at home more often. They may even be looking for expansion into new markets, although from the stats, we don't see a lot of new market entry activities there. But I think as time goes by, we will see a lot of new market entry. So with that, I would like to pass the time to John to bring us further on the corporate events that has gained momentum and the related global mobility considerations.
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth, and good morning, everyone. And you'll see here some examples of the corporate life events that many of us will need to engage on in the coming years as our companies attempt to recover and thrive in a post-pandemic world. And based on that last poll, that includes about at least 70% of us here. first, I'd like to recognize that, we have a broad spectrum of specialty areas in our audience today, and may not everybody lives and breathes mobility, like global mobility like I do, but it's a bit of an oversimplification, but global mobility refers to the moving of our workforce from country to country or region to region, and managing that impact these moves have on our business and employees. Now, global mobility is an important function within an organization because it really has to respond quickly to the changes in our business and ecosystems, including corporate life events, and really has direct engagement with the high volume of our employees and especially some executives. Now, for the past year, the global mobility teams have really been on the COVID-19 front lines, helping our mobile employees navigate disruptions, working with the business to understand the impacts, costs, and options with respect to remote and sometimes a displaced workforce. And, all the while providing an empathetic touch to our people during a time of crisis. And that role that mobility has played throughout the pandemic is quite similar to the role it can play during a corporate life event. And it's obviously stating the obvious here that the playing field in many industries is incredibly different today than it was a year ago, and companies are coming out of this in a very different place, for better or worse, and are having really to rethink their business and talent models for 2021 and beyond to attempt to recover and thrive. Now, here we have some marketplace trends that we are seeing. Companies are attempt to weather the storm and control cost. And now, Kenneth, I know you and I have socialized some of the specific examples that you're seeing in Asia Pacific region with respect to consolidations and shifts of workforce. Can you share an example with the group today?
Yes, these cases do come up from time to time, driven by various reasons. For example, manufacturing will be more affected by production cost and the recent trade tension. Others may move in view of economic stability of location, for example. I'm recently involved in a case in which the client was considering a move of their entire Hong Kong operation to potentially a few other locations in Asia to achieve cost savings. And they demonstrated how it makes a difference when global mobility was introduced in the early stage of the move. Factors such as cost projections, cost of living for expats, timing of movement, taking into account school terms and housing contracts, willingness for local employees to move, and compensation to facilitate their move. Ability to hire locally in the new locations are some of the many considerations that will enable a smooth transition.
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth. What's also interesting is that a corporate reorganization or restructuring can also have an impact on employees who are not moving. So for example, if we have a group of our employees in say, Singapore or any country that are shifting to a new entity, so it's simply a move on paper, it's still important for the company to review and vet whether this triggers, say, maybe a need to update immigration or work permits. There may be a need to refile or re-register with social and pension schemes. The possibility we'll have multiple employer payroll filings or reporting for the year, and whether there could be an impact on the employee's equity holdings. Let's talk a bit about why it's important for mobility then to really have a seat at the table when your organization commences on a corporate life event. And I live and breathe it, so I'm a bit biased, but I often say that a successful organization is one where the global mobility function is positioned within the company as a strategic advisor and not just a compliance center. In a typical year, an organization may move hundreds or thousands of employees around the globe. And as illustrated here, these moves involve partnering with many different stakeholders, including the business unit, corporate tax, HR, rewards, recruiting, and payroll, just to name a few. And a successful function is one that's able to be agile, hyper-responsive, collaborative, and solution-oriented to really ensure that these deployments of talent are impactful, cost-effective, and in line with our deployment and corporate strategy. And this functionality within mobility really positions us well to help advise and facilitate a successful corporate life event. Now, many challenges you're going to encounter are obstacles that mobility encounters as a normal course of business, and therefore can really help your business, see around the corner and think 2 steps ahead. Now, in general, there's 4 stages of a corporate life event: strategy, due diligence, execution for day 1 readiness, and post-transaction stand-up. And I appreciate this framework is really for a broader M&A event point of view, but the planning structure here really can be applied and should be applied to any type of event that we're discussing here today. I've been involved in a number of events, and they're as simple as moving a handful of individuals from one country to another, or as complex as say rolling out a global corporate restructuring plan where we're maybe applying business unit realignment for thousands of employees, consolidations of functions that involve transferring individuals and closing up shop in a number of countries, and workforce reduction through redundancies or early retirement. And due to the time due to the time limitations today, I'm just going to focus on the first 3 steps here, and really what we need to think about from a global mobility point of view to ensure a successful day 1 launch. Now, global mobility is generally not the function that's generating or designing our corporate strategy, but it certainly can be help enable that strategy with respect to the deployment of our workforce. And if we go back to Kenneth's example of a company that's restructuring and moving a group of employees from, say, country A to country B, it's essential that the planning is thoughtful around the employee experience. In that scenario, we may have some employees who are offered to actually move, and some who don't, and others who will be made redundant. So the questions we have to ask ourselves at this stage is, does our company have a relocation policy in place that adequately supports this move? Do we have a policy in place for those who will depart the company? Are we being thoughtful around the communication plan to ensure transparency and minimize disruptions? And this may also be a time to review whether our existing relocation policies are appropriate for what our new company will look like, post-transaction, or is that in line with current market trends? For example, if we're looking to reduce our mobility spend, we may be moving away from what's perceived as costly tax equalized assignments and more focused on, say, one-way transfers and business travelers. But we need to look and see, do we have the policies and processes in place to manage this type of transition? Now, let's look at a point of view from a growing and expanding company. If we're looking to, say, acquire a company in the process of expanding to a new market, do we envision any type of cultural or mobility policy differences that may contribute to a poor onboarding experience for the new employees? For example, are our new employees currently receiving certain benefits, housing assistance, cost of living that are not offered by our company? And it's important and critical to help think through the employee experience. Again, I believe mobility, the visibility that mobility has on our people and policies and positions will really help contribute and add value to these planning discussions. Excuse me. So due diligence is really the corporate life event phase where mobility function really needs to get involved, and generally does, if not the strategy phase. And this is where we really want to sort out everything we need to do or fix to ensure a successful day 1. The mobility organization quantify our impacted population and identify and has visibility where our employees are throughout the world. Now, some of the key considerations here include being thoughtful around immigration concerns. For example, is our population eligible to work in a new country, or what's the timeline required to gain the proper work visas? If we go back to my reorganization example, where we have employees simply moving to a new entity on paper, again, we still need to review the immigration concerns with that type of structure. Now, this is also the phase we really want to help educate the business on potential trailing cost. And this is an area of pain I've witnessed a few times. For our mobility professionals today, this actually I think is probably the most important area where you can add value. As you know, in our mobility world, often there are trailing costs, and it's never fun when it's unexpected, and certainly when it's unclear who owns these costs. For example, let's say say Kenneth here is currently on a tax equalized assignment from Hong Kong to Australia. As part of a reorganization, we need to repatriate Kenneth and make him redundant. So, sorry, Kenneth. We need to really know as a business if there could be some trailing tax costs for the company 12 to 24 months down the road, post his employment, and if we have properly accounted for this. And divestiture or separation event, have we documented who owns these trailing costs? Now, on the other side of this, I've seen situations where we have a reorganization changes in our, say, accounting or finance functions, and the accrual and accounting for the assignment cost gets lost in the transition. And this can generate a lot of excitement when it comes time for the company to fund Kenneth's host country tax obligations, as the go-forward finance team just didn't include that in their budgeting. And this is also a great time really to review our equity plans, and the impact of the event on our employees. So, for example, let's say Hey Young here is an employee in Singapore, and we're going to transfer her to Korea to support a corporate transaction. The questions we need to think about include, will this trigger a taxable deemed equity vesting event on her unvested, or say RSUs or unexercised stock option holdings? If yes, under our policy, or if we have one, who owns those costs? Do we need to consider she may have some cash flow constraints with that? And have we thought out, the communication plan to our employees who will be impacted by this? Now, to continue on equity, often an M&A transaction of, say, public companies are structured to avoid a taxable event for shareholders. And this is often kind of a U.S.-centric position, and what we really need to understand is whether that's a favorable tax position, whether that position is really respected by other, country jurisdictions where we have employees and mobile assignees. And if that's, 10, 20 countries, that's a pretty big project. Now, for example, if I'm a tax equalized, let's say assignee from the U.S. to Australia, and because of a transaction, I'm going to acquire a large number of new company shares. How is this treated under a mobility policy if that's a taxable event in Australia, but not in the U.S.? And if I'm tax equalized back to the U.S., who's going to bear that cost? Is that the employee? Well, we probably need to think about a robust communication plan for all of our employees or assignees in these impacted countries. Again, many things to think about think through the due diligence stage. And again, global mobility, I think, is really well positioned to ensure the organization has visibility on these potential pitfalls. Okay, now if we've done a thorough job during the due diligence phase of identifying all of our mobility-related risks and action items, we can then really turn our attention to day one readiness. Now, for a larger transaction, your company, you may be working with a formal management office and possibly a project manager assigned to the global mobility aspect of the transaction. And I've also seen this management obligation outsourced too. But I think the most important aspect of this phase is the development and rollout of a communication plan to our mobile employees. With any corporate life transaction we discussed earlier, our people are going to be impacted, whether it's moving to a new country, a new company, or possibly may be made redundant. Effective and timely engagement with them is really essential. Let's go back to Kenneth's example, where we have a group of employees who've been offered the opportunity to move from say, country A to country B. And really depending on the population, what I've seen companies do is offer a type of town hall Q&A session followed by an offer for individual meetings. These town hall sessions generally include, say, representatives from talent, mobility tax, rewards, and HR, and will cover the topics including what relocation benefits, what's the package specific to the opportunity here, a general comparison of the tax profile of the current and new country, and with a big footnote that every tax situation is different. The impact on rewards, equity, if it's triggered any taxable event triggered by the move, and and the new benefit package in the new country, including healthcare and social and pension schemes. Now, a town hall style communication, again, stating the obvious here, may not be appropriate when we have a corporate life event that's resulting in a reduction in our workforce. In many of these cases, a more tailored approach may be more appropriate. Now, within the scope of mobility, it would also be important to communicate the trailing actions and obligations to our individuals who may soon be former employees. If we go back to our example of Kenneth, he was our tax equalized employee in Australia. Now, we really want to ensure that he is clear on the tax support that may be required 1 or 2 years after his departure. There still could be outstanding tax reconciliations, either owed to or from him, and possibly, say, refunds coming back from Australia that we need him to facilitate back to the company. So again, if you take anything away from today's conversation, it's to be incredibly important to be thoughtful around your communication plan. Now, I appreciate we've covered a lot here in the past few minutes. So let me pause a bit and head back to Kenneth for our next polling question.
Thanks, John. And that brings us to the second polling question of the day. The question is, how has your organization's global mobility role changed as you navigate the recovery or thrive stage from COVID-19? And your options are: 1, reduced role due to travel restrictions and suspension of assignments. 2, stays somewhat the same. 3, expanded to cope with new types of request. And 4, don't know, not applicable. And while we're waiting for the results to come in, John, may I have your insights on how global mobility's role has changed from your observations in the U.S.?
Yeah, and Kenneth, I'll be looking forward to seeing the results of this polling question. But for the most part, I've really seen the mobility take a greater role in managing talent strategies. Now, when it comes to tackling the very complex question of how we manage a remote workforce, and this, of course, has been forced upon most companies due to the pandemic. And the inherent visibility that mobility has on our population and relationships across many functions within the company, really required to weigh in on this type of topic, makes mobility the kind of the de facto choice to manage the remote workforce journey. I do have a number of mobility contacts and clients who have been spending a fair amount of time this past few months with the CFOs and, say, CHROs of their respective company to help think about and solve how the company will approach remote work.
Thanks, John. Let's see whether our audience in Asia share the same view. Now, we've got quite an even split here. 32% of our audience says that their roles are reduced due to travel restrictions and suspension of assignment. 22% say that their role stays somewhat the same. And 23% say that their role has actually expanded to cope with new types of requests, and 20% of them say they don't know or not applicable. So it's quite an even split of views, which makes sense to me. I think international traffic has now been substantially reduced. But I do think that the nature of global mobility has changed by the mobility issue itself, the need to collaborate with other business functions a lot more frequently, and the need to respond to requests much more quickly. With that, I would like to pass the time to Hay to discuss some of the global mobility trends.
Thanks, Kenneth. As John explained, organizations are putting a lot of effort into achieving business resilience in a variety of ways, and global mobility continues to evolve in many ways based on the organization's needs and global trends. Global mobility trends can be classified into 3 categories. First, diversifying. Second, humanizing. And third, digitizing. Let's look at the first trend, diversifying. In the early 1990s, global mobility was divided into either long-term or short-term assignment type. And mobility location was mainly selected only within developed countries. However, at the start of the 21st century, global companies had added new forms of assignments such as international transfers or rotators, in addition to long-term and short-term assignments. And it is to utilize the diverse and skilled human resources. It seems to be an effective way to meet the needs of the business and talent development in developing countries when looking at the trend that the assignment from developed to developing countries. Mobility today includes a wide variety of employee types and a multitude of the locations with the numerous talent track lanes. This requires a more flexible and agile service delivery model to meet the needs of the diverse and changing population, as well as close coordination between mobility types and support levels. Well then, in the global mobility that is diversifying to meet the trend, it is necessary for the company to think about the purpose of moving its workforce to other overseas entities. For instance, companies should decide what they want to achieve and design compensation packages based on their goals. These days, assignment packages along with the assignment types can be different depending on the purpose of the assignment. What that means is that depending on whether the business value is high or low, and whether the need for talent development is high or low, the types of assignment and compensation package may differ for the target assignee. Let's say if both business value and the need for talent developments are high, that is actually shown on the top of the right-hand side. Companies may send experienced and talented employees to strategically important places with the best compensation package. This should include the current leaders and also upcoming executives. Or you see the right below, where the business value is high, but need for talent development is relatively low. It can be a form of dispatching suitable personnel for certain projects. In this case, it will be a short-term assignment or the same as a local hiring, but with a slightly more benefits. So for example, housing and vehicle support may be added to the local hiring package. Next is the high performer with the critical skills. It would be the case where the business value is not relatively high, but to nurture the talent. You may target a rising star who is not a next generation leader, but needs a lot of experience. Compared to the compensation package for the current or next generation leader, the rising star may be willing to pay a little bit more for their assignment cost. For example, in the case of housing support, the next generation leader will have the full package support, while the case of the rising star, he will at least have to pay for the cost of housing for himself that he had paid in the country. And the last one, which is the bottom of the left-hand side, where the business and development value are not significant. You can think of it for junior staff who would like to have international experience more for purpose. It's a good experience to get to work abroad, and it could be considered as a welfare benefit that the company provides. So there are times where the assignment packages with only minimal benefit is provided. So as you can see, by differentiating the assignment and compensation packages based on the strategies and priorities, both the company and the employee could be in a win-win situation. The second trend that is that the global mobility is becoming more human-centric. Employers are becoming increasingly human-centric in designing and managing mobility programs. It is not just one-way form in which a company sends employees to another country solely for business needs, but also for the personal experience that the employees feel their needs. For example, considering the situation of executives or employees who want to stay overseas for 2 to 3 years for their children's education. In this case, the company may sign a contract with the host country entity to put him on an assignment for the retention of the talent. Or, let's say if a competent foreign employee wants to go back to his home country to stay with his family, the company may consider sending him in the form of local employment in his home entity rather than making him leave the company. In this way, company can retain talent while satisfying the employees' needs. So that being said, the human-centric trend of global mobility is evolving, reflecting not only the needs of the company, but also the needs of employees. For the third trend I want to talk about is the digitizing of global mobility. It is quite surprising how technology has developed as global mobility changes and evolves. And I think it is something that the assignees who have been on assignment for the last several years would have experienced the changes in the technology and feel the same. We, Deloitte, have actually established a mobility management program such as a compliance dashboard to help the company to manage the mobility workforce efficiently. In the case of expatriates, information access is facilitated not only through the PC web, but also through the mobile phones that they use every single day. Therefore, they can easily check their tax filing obligations for their home and host countries anytime, anywhere. Especially for business travelers, the number of days that they stay is a critical part. So these can be also recorded and updated directly through their mobile phone system. And it helps companies effectively manage the mobility workforce and identify the potential risk of tax compliance obligation beforehand. One of the recent technological developments I thought to be very innovative is how the global mobility is implemented with the VR. Since long-term assignment is generally carried out few years, it was necessary to visit and experience the host country in advance through the pre-assignment trip. However, advanced technology that enables virtual experience with the VR has been developed, which help the company and the employee in terms of the cost and also under the current situation where there are restrictions on the movement between countries. It is expected that the establishment of these global mobility-related systems and technology will continue to be of great help to the global mobility management for the companies and its employees. Kenneth, jump in a poll. I think there is a polling question related to technology.
Yes, thank you, Hei. And that brings us to the final polling question of the day. The question is, are you tracking the locations of your employees today? And your options are, 1, yes, they are volunteering their locations. 2, yes, our technologies keeps track. 3, no, but we are working on a tracking system going forward. And 4, don't know, not applicable. And while we're waiting for the results to come in, John, what do you see as the biggest challenge for organizations to obtain full visibility of employee movements and assessment or quantifying the related tax risk?
Yeah, that's a great question. It could be a lot of things, but I've been working with a few organizations trying to solve this, and really consistently the top challenge has been around, say, the quality and source of tracking data. And it's very difficult to find a single source of data that provides reliable information on individuals' location, and especially when we have a remote workforce. Now, the solution, what I've seen, is often relying on multiple sources of data. It could be time and expense reports, travel expense reimbursements, badge swipes, or all the above. Obviously, efficiently polling and sorting this data, can be a full-time job that nobody wants to own. And so it's really important to sort out a technology, automation solution here before you commit to this journey.
Thanks, John. Let's look at the polling results. Right, we've got a majority of people saying that they don't know or not applicable. But other than that, we have quite an even split. We have 19% saying that they're not keeping track of the system of the travel, but they are going to do so going forward. 18.5% say that they are volunteering their locations to the employer. 16% saying that technologies will keep track of that. So it's a bit of a surprise to see that companies are not actually tracking or believe that it's not applicable to them, because it does potentially put the company at risk, both in terms of individual tax exposures and also corporate tax exposures. It has always been a challenge to make employees aware of and prioritize maintenance of their travel records. But the recent automation solutions that we see leveraging GPS technology means that smart devices are going to take over this tedious task. So I think with the rise of these technologies, companies should really reconsider managing risk that arises due to traveling employees. I think with the current situation, people are not traveling that much, but with the COVID situation gets better, people will be traveling a lot more. So with that, I would like Hay to carry on the discussion of what might be the new normal.
Thanks, Kenneth. Okay, let's move on. Now I'd like to talk a little bit more about our new normal, such as virtual assignment and remote work. Before, we used to call it as future work in our response stage of COVID. But I think it is no longer a future work since it has been already permitted to our life. So that being said, the remote work or virtual assignment, which is a new form of work highlighted in this global pandemic, was previously thought to be one of the short-term approach implemented by the companies to respond to the COVID. However, this change is not just a temporary phenomenon anymore, but a new paradigm that should be accepted. So, as I mentioned, the global mobility trends, the types of new normal are also incurred by reflecting the trends. First, it is a part of diversifying. During COVID, the companies are looking to find a way to make the global mobility resilient while putting the employees' safety at their top priority. So the virtual assignment and remote work were created as a new type of workforce in the response to COVID. The second, the types of new normal are closely related to the humanizing. I will explain through an example in the later slides, but there are cases where assignee value returning from the host country to home country or working remotely from a place other than on-site, depending on the environment and needs of the employee. So you can see how the company changes the form of the work centered on employees. And the remote work or virtual assignment is very closely related to the technology, as you can imagine. Since people no longer work in the fixed spaces, but rather work in other locations, even across the border, these new workforce would have been very difficult to be feasible without technology. Okay, so let's look at an interesting survey regarding remote work. According to the Deloitte Remote Work Compliance Survey back in July 2020, 40% of organizations have at least 50% of their workforce working remotely in a different location. And 38% of the organization have employees working remotely in at least 20 different locations. And 85% of the organizations are considering a long-term remote work strategy post-COVID-19. As shown in this survey result, companies are actively and strategically implementing the new normal by responding to COVID. Now, let's have a look at a few examples of remote work or virtual assignment that the company have experienced. The first example is where an assignee lives in his home country but works for a company in another country where he's locally hired. This is the case of local recruitment. This happens when you're hired locally and have to move to another country, but due to the COVID, you're still working in your home country. I've seen this case happens quite often because of the visa issue or the lockdown. The second example is when an assignee is working for a home entity while staying in the host country the lockdown even after his assignment ended. This is the case that can happen during the assignment. So although the assignment was ended, there was a situation where they could not return to their home country. Therefore, the assignee continues to stay in the host country and perform the services for the home country until the lockdown is released. The third situation is when an assignee is working for his host entity while staying in the home country due to safety issues. This is actually contrary to the previous example explained right before. During the assignment period, you may work for the host entity in your home country. There can be many reasons. For example, there is a safety issue in the host country where there has been uncontrollable confirmed cases. So you're back to your home country because it is a more secure place. Or you may visit your home country on a short vacation during your assignment period, but then fail to return. For this variety of reasons, remote work or virtual assignment has become rather essential assignment types through COVID-19. Remote work or virtual assignment is a cross-functional effort. It requires resilient leaders across enabling a function to evolve the organization's approach. So this page shows what are the various aspects to be considered to make the new types of assignments or workforce feasible. There will be tax and payroll compliance parts where the company should consider potential tax implications due to the assignment. It includes the corporate tax and the employment tax areas. For initiating the new type of assignment, the regulatory side, such as visa and immigration aspects, are also considered. Besides, the company would need to bring more attention to the assignment details. How the assignment package will be formalized, how to run and manage the assignment, who will be responsible for what. Since it involves many stakeholders from different divisions, we can say that the assignment requires cross-functional effort for the best strategic approach. Now I'd like to share some thoughts on how organizations can take this forward by summarizing the steps. I think the first step is identifying the organizational needs and the objectives. What is your purpose? What are you really aiming at? Is this mainly focused on increasing your business value, or is this mainly focused on employees' career development value? It can be a mix of both, or maybe it is for the business resilience. I think getting a sense of needs and the objective comes first, and then thinking feasibility, risks, and other impacts comes after. The next step will be analyzing the key considerations which we just talked about. That brings more definition to the strategy in terms of designing assignment packages and reviewing the tax compliance implications, visa and immigrations, and HR functions that support talent attraction and retentions. By reviewing various aspects of making this happen, it requires participation of major stakeholders such as HR, payroll, IT security, and finance, etc. It is also important that the roles and the responsibilities are segregated among the stakeholders. Global mobility can be operated effectively due to the segregation and collaboration of these responsible departments. And after this stage, finally, the company can implement the assignment policies and make it work. So we have talked about the global mobility trends. how global mobility evolves over the decades and the recent COVID-19 situation. The forms of assignment will continue to evolve in the future, and the global mobility will become more important factor in the corporate strategy and business development. Now I'd like to hand it over to Kenneth for Q&A. Kenneth?
Thanks, Hay, and also John. This brings us to the end of today's discussion. We now have some time to respond to some questions from our audience. The first question we have, probably one for John. How has COVID changed the sentiments towards business travel and international assignment? Over to you, John.
Yeah, good question. Let's first maybe talk about business travel. And I would say with the travel restrictions still in place in many locations, and the business traveling model has really been less feasible for obvious reasons. But I think companies are also finding that they can do business as usual just as well on a virtual platform. So I think even when it becomes easier to travel, companies are enjoying the kind of the cut in travel costs, and that we may not see a material uptick for a while, even when things get back to relative normal. On the international assignments, I think we did see a dip earlier this year, or I call the pause, but we do see these really picking up again. I think that they may look a bit different. One change is that depending on whether assignees want to willing to move their entire families with them, and say suffer through what we're doing with my 2 young children in a couple of weeks in Singapore. But and this whether that's for the first 6 months or 12 months, while you'd say the hope that travel becomes a bit easier, that can give rise to additional complexities of possible double tax residency, double taxation, social tax costs, and so if you're doing your 100,000th move from country A to country B, you may need to be dig in a little deeper here in the planning phase to see if there's some hidden costs there or ways to structure it a bit better. Thanks, Kenneth.
Thanks, John. Second question: companies are cutting cost. Do you expect companies to reduce international assignments as part of cost cutting? Perhaps, Hay, you can take this one.
Yeah, sure. International assignments are generally perceived to be expensive. So unfortunately, this would be one of the areas to look at for achieving the cost savings. However, it is not only the factor affect popularity of the international assignment. As John mentioned earlier, there are many other business activities that will achieve cost cutting, and this may trigger new assignments and business travelers. Therefore, we would expect a change in the objectives of having international assignments, although the volume of these movements will depend on the industry they are in and their respective business strategies.
Thanks, Hay. Question 3. Perhaps one for John again. Do you anticipate any countries will relax tax regulations to accommodate the current travel challenges or to attract mobile remote workers?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think we've seen a few countries offer kind of like this some temporary relief that I'm finding really applies to a pretty narrow scope of displaced individuals, but I don't really anticipate an empathetic response from taxing authorities. In most countries, the highest percentage of tax revenue is collected via employer payroll withholdings and tax revenue in individual income taxes. And countries are struggling, for revenue just like many companies. And if anything, we really anticipate maybe a higher level of compliance enforcement on employers with respect to, reporting and remittance of tax on their employees who are temporarily working, or maybe currently displaced, in another country. Therefore, we really think it's important for companies to prioritize their policies and processes with respect to remote work and business travelers. Now, interestingly, there are a few locations in the world that are attempting to attract remote workers, and these are generally countries that say thrive on tourism. such as, sunny island destinations like Bermuda or the Bahamas. And, really to make up for lack of tourist revenue, they've been offering attractive, flexible work visas that allow individuals to, say, work and live and remotely from a lush tropical island, while avoiding taxation. And this would certainly be an attractive scenario.
Thanks, John. Well, living and working remotely in Bermuda or the Bahamas does sound very attractive to me. I think it brings out the bright side of remote work. Well, while there needs to be some sort of control, tracking, formalizing policies, but once these are in place, it will bring your organization's employee well-being to the next level. This is the trend for the future of work. If you're not offering remote work, your competitors are. Remote work is widely welcomed by employees, and they see this as an important part of their total rewards. And guess what? Your employees may be happy for a pay cut as a trade-off for having a flexible work environment. That, unfortunately, is all we have time for. Hey, and John, thank you. And special thanks to all of you who were able to join us. We would like to encourage you to fill out the short survey that will pop up on the screen momentarily and tell us what you think about today's program. If you join us late, please note that this presentation will be archived for future viewing. If you feel that others would benefit from this webcast, please share the webcast via the Share This icon or have them visit the debrief website. We will respond to all the questions submitted during the webcast in a couple of weeks. Also, if you think of any other questions or comments later, please feel free to reach out either to me or our speakers. We would be more than happy to talk to you. And please don't forget to tune in to our next scheduled webcast from the Corporate Income Tax and Bold Play series on the 24th of November, titled M&A and COVID-19 Strategy in Australia and New Zealand, Charting New Horizons in the World of Asymmetric Recovery. And last, from all of us at Deloitte, thank you for your participation in Deloitte's Asia Pacific Tax webcast today. Goodbye.